An Indian Air Force transport aircraft carrying 8 crew members and 5 passengers that took off from Assam's Jorhat earlier today has gone missing. The Antonov An-32 took off around 12:25 p.m. for landing strip in Mechuka in Arunachal Pradesh. Well, let's go across to Vishnu Shom for more on this. And Vishnu, they lost contact with this aircraft at 1 o'clock.
That's right. So shortly, half an hour after the aircraft, an An-32 transport, which has been one of the basic transport aircraft the Indian Air Force has used for decades, about half an hour after it took off from Jorhat in Assam on its way to Mechuka in Arunachal Pradesh, it lost contact with the ground. There was no contact from the pilots after that. The authorities waited for some more time before declaring the aircraft missing. It remains missing at this juncture. It was expected to have landed in Mechuka in Arunachal Pradesh, which has an air landing ground. It's essentially a small airstrip some time back. There are 13 people on this aircraft, including 8 personnel. I'm unclear about who the other 5 people on board are. Are they armed forces personnel, part of the Air Force, or civilians? Unclear at this juncture. The An-32 is the backbone, in a sense, of transport operations of the Indian Air Force all across the line of actual control between India and China, the line of control in other parts between India and Pakistan, and indeed Air Force transport operations all over the country. In 2016, there was another An-32 that went missing and that remains missing. All of the people on board, 29 presumed dead. That was on a flight from Chennai to Port Blair and went missing in the Bay of Bengal. I believe this is the only incident involving an An-32 which has gone missing since that time. We can only hope that there are survivors in this crash, but the emergency procedure to locate an aircraft has now kicked in. There'd be massive resources which would be deployed. There'd be helicopters, there'd be soldiers, there'd be aircraft on the ground. They'd be trying their best to find out just what went wrong.
Right, Vishnu, tell us more about this search operation. Do we know if the weather was bad and this is a very heavily forested area where it was headed to?
Gargi, at this stage, we don't know whether the weather was bad, but typically you would not be operating into Mechuka if the weather in that area was very bad. So a call would have been taken. They look at the weather very, very carefully before actually proceeding. But whether there was a technical problem or there was a navigational error, there could be a multitude of reasons which could have impacted this particular flight. At this stage, they're still calling it a missing aircraft, and one can only hope that that miraculously the aircraft does land, because it's not been too many hours. It's just been about 3 hours or so less. I'm not sure whether there's still likely to be any fuel remaining, or how much fuel the aircraft was actually carrying on board. But they're calling it a missing aircraft at this juncture, so we'll refer to it in the same way. But to answer your question, yes, the terrain extremely rugged, very heavily forested in that area. Ingress and egress, entry and exit into the Mechuka Valley is very, very difficult. It requires a great deal of pilot skills. Mechuka itself is an air landing ground. It's a small air landing ground. It's essentially a strip which a handful of Indian Air Force aircraft do operate on every now and again. Increasingly, it's being used. In the past, for several decades, it was hardly ever used. But as part of a policy to actually reactivate a lot of these air landing grounds, Mechuka is being used along with several others. But a matter of huge concern now that An-32 remains missing. I'll continue updating you as we get word of what went wrong.